happening and not do anything about it. So I thought it was important to talk about the bystander effect and kind of give an explanation for why it happens in the first place, so that we could ideally have like a little bit more compassion for people who are in these situations, but also have a greater understanding of the dynamic that's at play in the horse world and how it impacts everybody. So, for people who aren't aware, the bystander effect is a psychological phenomenon that has been studied where people tend to be less likely to help someone or something in need when there is a crowd present. And the reason being for this, like the reason why people tend to be less likely to help someone in need when there's a present, is because people are, sorry, my freaking dog and cats are knocking stuff over. But the reason why people tend to be less likely to help when there's a crowd present is because there's this assumption that someone else is going to step in, that like I don't need to, there's a lot of other people witnessing, of course someone else is going to do something. So we see this happening all the time in the horse world because people are operating with the assumption that someone else will act. So we see these videos that are posted online from international competitions or in very public showgrounds where people are treating horses unfairly, and then we get people going, how in the world can people witness this and not do anything? And we're seeing the bystander effect at play because there's probably a lot of people within those crowds who are not fully comfortable with what's going on that are then, sorry, one second, I'm just gonna fix my audio. That are then freaking getting dragged in. Like there's people who are witnessing these things happening that aren't comfortable with them and they want to do something, but they're operating with the assumption that other people are going to step in on their behalf and that they don't need to because there's so many people present that of course it's not going to have to be them to act. Meanwhile, when it's a one-on-one instance and you're witnessing something bad happening and you're the only person witnessing it, people tend to be a little bit more likely to act in those circumstances because there's this recognition that if they don't act, no one else is around to do so. So it's this problem in the horse world that's influenced by the belief that if you don't step in, someone else is going to on your behalf. And then it's also combined with the fact that the horse world is such a harsh and judgmental place that if you do speak out, you are at high risk of feeling like your safety within the horse world or your belonging within the horse world is going to be at risk. So a lot of people are actually afraid to speak out because it'll alienate them from the crowds that they have grown comfortable being a part of. And if you do speak out, it subjects you to a lot of mistreatment and cruelty and judgment from your peers. So there's that component of it as well. And then you also have the people who are actively contributing into the abuse that are likely to disparage you and abuse you, not in a way that's dissimilar to what they do to horses. So then people are even more scared and they're more likely to double down and just not say anything and just sit tight and go, oh, well, don't worry, someone else will do it. So I wanted to bring this up because I think that more people should speak out, but I also think that we need to recognize why some people's version of speaking out is recording what they witness and then sharing it later. And that plays into the fact that a lot of people are afraid of how the elites in the horse world are going to react and how they will be treated if they actively seek out in the moment. I think another important thing to consider is that if you're watching someone actively abuse the horse in the moment, especially if it's a man and you are a woman or a female presenting person, you could end up getting hurt. So there's also that component of things. It's like, are you alone witnessing the situation in terms of alone in your crowd, or do you have other people that you are immediately with? Like, I don't necessarily mean the crowd as a whole, but do you have a group of people that you're with that would back you in that approach? Are you at risk of physical harm if you do say something? Because it doesn't necessarily need to occur in the moment. There's a lot of pressuring and coercive tactics that are used by horse people to push people into silence. So then that makes it harder to speak out, because if you have to worry about someone potentially knowing where you live or where you ride or knowing people that you are close to and impacting your ability to participate in the horse world, that creates fear as well. So the bystander effect protects abusers, undoubtedly. But I think that we can acknowledge that while acknowledging the people who are participating in that mindset aren't necessarily doing it with ill intent. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they don't care about what's happening to horses. there's such a level of fear that is involved with speaking out. And it's because of how our community functions and how many people are working to create this attitude where it's very taboo to speak out against certain people, especially once they contribute to some level of success in the horse world and make a name for themselves. If you speak out against those people when you're not at their level, you're viewed as a nobody and you're othered by the groups around you. And there's a lot of pressure to stay silent and a lot of bullying. And honestly, the tactics used to keep people silent are really similar to what people use to train horses and the abusive tactics we see used on horses. So there's a huge pressure to just not speak out. And like speaking as someone who obviously does speak out against a lot of things, the level of like abuse that I face online is pretty substantial. I have a few protective mechanisms that make it a little bit easier than it might be if I lived somewhere else. Like if I lived in a hub where a lot of these people were competing and showing, and I was having to see them a lot, it would be harder to speak out because you're more imminently surrounded by people and you also feel less safe because they're directly in your local community and could find out where you live and could retaliate. And people still could find out where I live and whatnot. But like being in Canada, when a lot of the people I'm speaking about are international or in the US, it is a little bit of a safety net. And I'm also doing a lot of it online. And I now live on a gated property because honestly, it's something that I thought about before I moved a couple of times because there were times where I was living on rather main roads. And it made me a lot less comfortable. So there's a lot of factors that limit people in their comfort was too much on what the people witnessing didn't do versus what the person and jarring that makes them really, really uncomfortable and that they don't morally agree with. A lot of people respond to that discomfort by going into a freeze response, and the stress of witnessing that causes them to just not respond at all. And it's not because they're trying to protect the person or because they don't think that there's an issue going on. It is like a trauma response. So in order to make it more comfortable for people to speak out, there needs to be a certain level of understanding for those reactions and also understanding that there is an inherent risk in speaking out. And that when people have the bravery to record and document something instead of just witnessing it, they're creating a situation where my cat's just chasing his tail in the background. I'm not laughing at what I'm saying. They're creating a situation where people are less likely to speak out if they feel like speaking out is going to create a lot of judgment. And there's been multiple cases of abuse recently where if someone hadn't had the thought to take a photo or take a video or document it in some capacity, that the abuser would have gotten off completely free and they would have just not had there would have been no hope in holding them accountable. An example that comes to mind immediately is with what happened with Cobain recently, where the horse the horse was tied up in a stall and left like that while the trainer went to a show and then broke its neck and died. And someone came back to that barn and took a photo of what had happened, even though it was a gory and horrific scene. And if they had not done that, there's a very high chance that there would have been absolutely the person might not have necessarily reamed out the trainer or yelled at them. The choice to document it is actually leading to great accountability. And posted on here where they chase a horse backwards. And someone thought to record that. Did anyone step in? A way of stepping in, even if not in the immediacy. And what I also want to remind people of in situations like that is even if you step in the moment and someone were to stop that in the moment, it's highly likely the chances to step in. It's usually where it's minutes at a time and they're witnessing something. And oftentimes there's also a lot of things where people are witnessing things from further away. So we got to recognize how valuable it is to record stuff. Effect, I don't really think that the people recording and then later share the footage are actually partaking in the bystander effect because they have done something about it. They've documented it and they're putting themselves at risk to share that footage to hold the person accountable when it would be much, much easier to just not say anything. And that's the reality of the situation. So we really need to be a safe place for people to come forward and like approach regarding abusive situations that they've witnessed, even if they don't have the ability to share it right away, even if it's a while after the fact. If we would rather have that information come out and the person be held accountable, we need to foster a community where it's actually safe for people to speak out about things without having them being judged as hard or harder than the person who's actually perpetuating the abuse. And honestly, a lot of times the people who witnessed it are criticized and microanalyzed harder than the person perpetuating the abuse, which takes the magnifying glass off of the person who actually did the wrong thing and instead puts it on to everyone else and how they reacted while they were watching it. And the other thing to note is that it's really easy to watch a video online and be triggered by that video in the comfort of your home and go, if I was there, I would have done XYZ, because you in the moment when you're with or someone whose job is literally to just be in traumatic situations where you're trained to do it. It's really hard to say how you'll respond in a traumatic situation like that when you're witnessing something shocking and surprising that you are usually caught by surprise when you witness. So it's easy to say that when you're watching the video, but it's not really a fully fair thing to say because you don't know what factors are at play for the person who's documented and then shared that. And the choice to share it is an act of bravery in itself that we should be acknowledging and appreciating. Otherwise, if you get mad at the people for sharing because of them not doing enough in the moment, sharing too late, not taking a good enough video or whatever, you're just reaffirming the idea that unless they can be an absolutely perfect advocate, that there's no point in speaking out. And that is not helpful. So we need to actually appreciate imperfect advocacy where people are doing the best that they can in the moment that they can, or when they're able to process it and actually really think about what they witnessed and saw, and appreciate the bravery that is coming forward and being like, hey, I witnessed something that really troubled me and here's what it is, especially when it involves someone who's really high up in the horse community, because speaking out against prevalent figures in the horse community is very, very difficult. And a lot of people rightfully struggle with that. And we just need to have them give them the space and comfort to be able to freely share those things. Otherwise, we're actually losing out on a lot of conversation and evidence that would make people more accountable. So yeah, we got to open the doors for that, because the bystander effect is just it's a well documented human psychological thing. So for people to pretend that they're above potentially participating in that, when I can almost guarantee that every single one of us has been a bystander at some point, it's a holier than thou attitude that is holding yourself to a standard that there's no way you've met it, because all of us have witnessed injustices at some point and not said anything, even if it's something smaller, like when you're young, watching someone be bullied. And while you're not necessarily actively bullying them, you're not saying anything either. And in that case, you're a bystander, and speaking out could have made a difference, but you didn't do it. So there's many, many examples of this. And there's a lot of instances where people have been bystanders and haven't said anything, and all of us have done it. So I think that we need to operate with a little bit of grace and encourage people to speak out and make it safe to feel like they can without feeling attacked and targeted. Because we're also not taking into account each person's individual experience, especially for people who have been victims of abuse themselves. Witnessing abuse can be exceptionally triggering, and it can put you in a freeze state where you don't respond, and then further punishing someone for their lack of ability to respond as quickly as what you might think they should have. It's not helpful, and it doesn't actually help hold the abuser accountable. It actually keeps abusers safer by making it higher risk for people to speak out against them, because if you don't go about it in the perfect way, you're going to be criticized and microanalyzed and judged for it. And that's really difficult. So the bystander effect helps promote horse abuse by people not speaking out, but then also people who shame bystanders who have later come forward to share what they have seen are also helping protect abusers by making it really uncomfortable to speak out in the first place. And the only person that protects is the abuser, because it makes it less likely that people are going to want to speak out against them. And we also need to factor in just like how scary it is to come after someone who is really well known in the community. Like a great example, I think, of this would be like with George Morris and his downfall. That man, for so many years, was so untouchable. Like, you could not say a single thing wrong about him, even as he made his entire brand off of him literally bullying children in public in clinics. It was so taboo to speak out, where if you said anything, you would get absolutely copycatted his behavior by being a bully and saying that it was like tough love and in the name of training and being honest. When you're teaching people, and people would use it as a justification, oh well, like, you can't sugarcoat everything, and it's like, yeah, you don't need to sugarcoat everything, but there's a difference between sugarcoating something and just being an asshole. And honestly, he was an asshole a lot, and that's just referencing the way that he spoke to people without going into his history of being a literal abuser, like physically, to children. But he was untouchable, and the level of fear that people had to feel in speaking up against him, and like the abuse that that could subject you to, made it so that it was a lot harder to speak out. So imagine then, if you are someone who is being abused by someone like that, going up against that crowd of angry people who cannot even handle people saying, hey, I don't think the way George Morris speaks to people in clinics is okay. If people can't even handle that, coming out and saying, hey, this person abused me years ago and I've been scared to speak up until now, but now I think is the time to, that is such a major risk. And those types of attitudes render people unable to speak out for years. And then the longer you wait to speak out, the harder it becomes to speak out afterwards. And a lot of these big name riders are really, really hard to criticize in any capacity, much less in a way that's really scandalous and has the potential to be career ending. So people who make the choice to speak out against them despite that are being really freaking brave. And for like anyone we've heard a scandal about or had even a suspicion about, there's probably students and like workers who've had a negative experience with someone like that that haven't said anything yet because they're freaking terrified of how people are going to respond to it, along with how that abusive person might respond to it. And they're too scared to speak out. And rather than shaming them, I think we need to look at how entrenched the degree of abuse and manipulation and coercive behavior is in the horse world, that lends people who are prominent figures that much power over other people, where they have this psychological control even after someone's no longer working or training for them or training with them and has removed themselves from their physical presence. They're still so scared of what that person is capable of that they don't speak out. And that's the nature of abuse. And I think that learning the psychology behind that and why people handle things in the way that they do and why there is such fear in speaking out is really helpful in having a little bit more understanding and recognizing the fact that the abuse that is enabled towards the horses and accepted towards the horses is also the same type of abuse that enables the abuse of humans and results in the mistreatment of humans. It's all connected, and we need to start to shift the way we think of things to make it more comfortable for people to be able to speak out, or it's never going to change. But yeah, the bystander effect is a normal thing, and we can hopefully help make people more comfortable in speaking out by showing them that there's a community of people who will support you if you speak out against welfare injustices, and that you have people who have your back if anyone ever tries to give you a hard time for telling the truth. And also having grace for them if they wait to speak out because they're too afraid, or if they need a moment or whatever. Just being understanding, and that's really all it takes, is just being understanding and recognizing the fact that not everyone has the capacity to speak out right away, and that it's better late than never. And if you badger people for speaking out too late and make them regret speaking out in the first place, really all that accomplishes is, if they could have seen how it was going to go, they wouldn't have said anything, and it would have protected the abuser. So then it's like, who are we protecting? Is holding these people hyper accountable for not speaking out soon enough worth risking them never saying anything? In my opinion, absolutely not. It's a no-brainer. We should, better late than never. It's better to get more context on a situation and where people are coming from and what they've experienced, and see that than it is to just not see that at all and try to hold people hyper accountable and encourage them to be like the absolutely perfect advocate, which no one's perfect. There's no such thing as perfect advocacy, and trying to aim for perfect advocacy results in a lack of advocacy, because we need to allow people to have mistakes and to be human, um, as they learn how to say their point. But anyways, that's all I wanted to say, because I've been thinking about it a lot, because it's been a few posts now where people have been like really on the person who documented something happening and criticizing the fact that they just stood there and recorded instead of doing anything. And I don't think it factors in all of the limiting factors that might make someone uncomfortable approaching someone in person. And the other thing to consider too is that like horse welfare is so poorly regulated from a legal standpoint that even if you did approach them in person, you said, hey, what you're doing is wrong, don't do that, unless they're willing to like listen to you and be like, yeah, you know what, you're right, I'm gonna stop. If you try to rip the horse away from them or like push them off the horse or whatever, you could end up being viewed as the problem in that situation, because it's so hard to like to mandate horse welfare, and it's so poorly protected. So it's not even necessarily going to be helpful to do something like that. So that's another thing to consider, is that sometimes all you can do is record, and getting all up in their face and trying to stop it physically oftentimes doesn't work. And they'll just ignore you, or they'll go move to secret. So documenting it, in my opinion, in a lot of cases is like one of the best ways to do it, in terms of if you're frozen and you're nervous, you don't know how to respond, and you also are worried about how they might handle an altercation if you were to approach them. But yeah, let's stop fixating on what people who have taken the time out of their day and taken the risk to publicly document shit that they see. Let's stop making them the problem, and instead look at the people in the videos that they documented and why it's so appalling, and go, that's not okay. Let's focus on the person who's actually really at fault here. And yeah, and also have grace with yourselves, because if you freeze in a moment that is shocking and jarring and that you are unexpecting, and like you don't know how to react in the moment, and you need time to think and process before you know how to react, that's a pretty normal human response, no matter what people online try to tell you. So anyways, thank you for listening, everybody, and I'll